So who is the only car maker on this planet that managed to sell a lot more cars in Q1 2020 than in Q1 2019? But of course, despite this, legendary epic fail Tesla shooters like Jim Chanos came out again and said, as always, some not very smart stuff. So let's analyze a bit more how Tesla will fare in 2020. The production rate at Giga Shanghai is looking excellent, and Tesla has even filed for a permit to start construction of the Giga Berlin as soon as possible. And the Tesla Cybertruck has just passed the 600,000 reservations mark.
Regarding other companies, BYD and Toyota now plan to cooperate on electric cars in China. Not bad, Toyota, you might survive after all. And VW is busy trying to fix their quite insane software problems with the ID.3. Meanwhile, we are shown how the augmented reality HUD in the ID.3 will look like, and we have to say it's freaking awesome. And then of course a bit on air taxis, come on, it just has to be. As always, a lot to talk about, so stay tuned.
So in this global crisis right now, the Tesla bears, who we thought were intelligent enough to have learned their lesson, when the Tesla stock rose from $170 last year to almost $1,000, now of course come out of their bear holes again. They are probably seeing their luck returning again amidst this global market turmoil. For example, the legendary epic fail Tesla shorter Jim Chanos, who already lost quite a bit of money on shorting Tesla in the last run-up, now suddenly comes forth again and proclaims he remains short on Tesla. That's nice for you, Jim. This guy probably will never learn. Only when his funny hedge fund will finally go bankrupt because of his Tesla short position. Only then he might learn his lesson. Of course, here we know that Tesla couldn't be in a stronger position under the current circumstances. Let's just compare Tesla to some other car makers, shall we? So while Porsche, for example, has a 20.2% sales decline in Q1 2020 as compared to Q1 2019, Hyundai even sees a 40% sales drop for the same time period. Fiat Chrysler, 10% drop. Toyota, 9%. Volkswagen, 13%. Audi, 14%. BMW, 15%. And Nissan, 30%. Lastly, GM with 7%. And which one is the only car maker on this freaking planet that sold more cars in Q1 2020 than in Q1 2019? Yes, that's right. Tesla sold a staggering 88,400 cars in Q1 2020 despite the global crisis, which is 40% more than in Q1 2019. Yes, while all the other car makers are on average down by 20%. Tesla is up 40%. Up! And yet, some people are still stupid enough to continue shorting Tesla. We remain steadfast in our assessment that Tesla will be the only car maker who will sell at least as many cars in 2020 as in 2019. All other automakers will sell significantly less.
And as if that wasn't enough, the Giga Shanghai is ramping up car production even more, now even exceeding the weekly production target of 3,000 Model 3s per week. Because demand in China for Tesla is so high that despite the crisis, they still have a hard time meeting demand. Plus, the Model Y expansion of Giga Shanghai is progressing China style extremely fast and is set to be finished next year as planned. So next year, Giga Shanghai will also be pumping out Model Ys. Now we wouldn't be surprised to see Giga Shanghai produce more than 200,000 cars next year. So in many regards, Giga Shanghai is really a lifesaver. Tesla will easily be able to offset the decline in car sales in the US and Europe with the increased production and demand in China. And the Model Y hasn't even really started hitting. Deliveries were just starting, so of course when Model Y starts ramping up again after the Fremont factory will reopen in the next 1 or 2 months, we will see huge demand for the Model Y. And we all know that the Model Y will basically be Tesla's cash cow. Oh, and we didn't even talk about Giga Berlin yet. Works there are progressing as planned despite the crisis, and Tesla now even filed for a permit to start construction of the grounding of the factory so that the schedule can be kept exactly as planned. Which means that despite the protests we had in the last months, despite the multiple delays with some court orders to halt tree felling activities, and now despite the virus crisis, that despite all these adverse circumstances, the factory should still be finished by summer next year as planned. This is absolutely insane. Tesla is just expanding and growing as if nothing happened. 2021 will be a perfect year for Tesla with Giga Berlin and the Model Y expansion at Giga Shanghai finishing. Sure, sales won't be stellar in 2020, still a bit more than 2019 probably, but certainly not stellar. But 2021, wow, even with a global recession, we predict that 2021 will see a sharp rise in Tesla sales numbers when those two factories are finished. Oh, and in all this, we didn't even mention our favorite retro-futuristic, brutalistic cyberpunk vehicle, the Cybertruck. Cybertruck has now passed 600,000 pre-orders. Yes, that's right, 600,000 pre-orders. This radically styled pickup truck has a lot more pre-orders than the Model 3 had back in the day. The Model 3 was hovering around 400,000 pre-orders, and we see how well this translated into actual Model 3 sales. Cybertruck will go absolutely nuts. We think that Tesla won't even be able to meet worldwide Cybertruck demand with its future central US Cybertruck Gigafactory. It will probably take years until Tesla will even be able to halfway meet global demand for the Cybertruck.
So if one car maker is in the position to not only survive the crisis, but also come out of the crisis even stronger than before, then it is Tesla. Other car makers? Not so much. Every single one of them is tanking, while demand for their diesel and gasoline cars was already declining even before the crisis. Imagine that! Even before the crisis, Daimler claimed huge losses. Even before the crisis, GM saw declining sales. It will be the legacy car makers who will have a really hard time. And we predict that some of them won't survive. The current crisis is a Darwinian survival of the fittest event. We can see evolution live at work here. Evolution of car companies. Only the fittest will survive. And Tesla is on the top spot in that regard. The automotive landscape in the next years will be completely different than that in the last years. And it might even accelerate our transition to sustainable transport in the end. So while things are looking really bad for some legacy car makers, there are a few exceptions. And two legacy car makers that we think will probably survive are VW and Toyota. Now, in the past, we were not really optimistic for Toyota because of their reluctance to build EVs. But it appears now that they finally understood it. They are namely partnering with the Chinese electric car maker BYD to produce EVs for the Chinese car market. This strategic move might really save them, because if Toyota would cling to their absurd belief that hydrogen cars would be the future and would only release electric cars by 2025, as they initially had planned, we wouldn't be so optimistic for Toyota. But as it is now, with the new BYD partnership, they will probably make it, kept afloat by the Chinese market until their worldwide EV offensive starts in 2025.
Now, another car maker that we are quite optimistic for is VW. VW switched from being, let's put it mildly, not the most moral company on this planet, with Dieselgate and everything, to being absolutely bullish on electric cars. And even though the release of their new ID.3 is plagued by insane software problems, many of which seem to be of quite severe nature, we think that they will be able to get the problems under control at some point. They plan to deliver the first 20,000 units this year, while some features might be deactivated and patched per software update later, because of the underlying software issues. But when the problems are gotten under control, we think that the ID.3 will sell extremely well. The car starts a bit under 30,000 euros after all, so with rebates we are seeing an EV here which looks really cool at mid 20,000 euro levels. This would really open up the EV market to a lot of new buyers. This is of course the entry-level version with a 45 kWh battery, corresponding to a real-world range of up to 300 kilometers. The maxed-out version will have a 77 kWh battery, translating to a maximum range of 500 kilometers, comparable to the Model 3 long range. The car also has some truly amazing features, and we have to say we also really like the design. It is unusually progressive for a German car, if you ask us. We were quite surprised, we have to say, when we saw it last year at the Frankfurt Auto Show, the video of which you can watch right here. But the coolest feature is probably the augmented reality head-up display, which was now shown a bit clearer in a new video. This means that you will see projections in the windshield, highlighting some real-world objects, such as cars in front of you, or arrows for turning around, perspectively correctly placed on the ground, and also the target destination, for example, where you would arrive, embedded into the real world. This is really quite amazing, we have to say, and we wish that Tesla would show a little bit more love for head-up displays. Seriously, this is the only gripe we have with Tesla. Elon somehow doesn't like HUDs for whatever reason, and we certainly would like to see an augmented reality head-up display like this one, for example in Cybertruck. So yes, we are quite optimistic for VW despite their current problems.
So now let's take a look what our air taxis are doing, shall we? We already talked about the Chinese air taxi manufacturer Yihang quite a few times. They started a trial run of air taxis in the Chinese city Guangzhou, with many more cities in China preparing to implement their air taxi service. Therefore, Yihang reported growing sales and revenue in their latest earnings report. Their revenue saw an 83.2% increase in 2019 as compared to 2018, with $17.5 million in revenue. So flying cars for sure are an emerging new disruptive market, with a projected size of $1.5 trillion by 2040, according to a recent report from Morgan Stanley. So despite the current crisis, we are pretty sure that the air taxi market will just continue to grow. Yihang will probably first operate only in China, because the Civil Aviation Administration in China, the Chinese version of the FAA, is much more open to air taxis. So we think that we will see commercial use of air taxis first in China, and probably first in the big Tier 1 cities like Beijing, Shanghai, Guangzhou, or Shenzhen. Regarding other flying car companies, the Munich-based air taxi startup Lilium received $240 million in a new funding round. And the funding round was led by whom? By Tencent, a Chinese multinational conglomerate. And for sure, they know that air taxis are the future. So of course it makes sense for them to invest in this new market. But why did they choose Lilium over Yihang? Well, we assume that's because the Lilium air taxi will be a lot more capable than the Yihang ones. Both are really good concepts, but the Lilium jet is more like an airplane VTOL hybrid, therefore more efficient, enabling much higher ranges. Lilium plans for their jet to reach a range of 300 kilometers when it enters commercial use in 2025. The Lilium jet will seat 5 passengers and can reach speeds up to 300 kph, whereas the Yihang 216 can only seat 2 passengers. Both air taxis will of course be fully automated, no pilot necessary.
Now another interesting air taxi startup which we didn't mention yet and which weirdly is also based in Germany, what's going on in Germany suddenly, is Volocopter. Of all the air taxi designs, we have to say that this is by far the ugliest. But But okay, as long as it works, we guess looks don't matter so much. They are based in the really unspectacular small town Bruchsal, and even though they might not have the best looking air taxi, they certainly have an excellent overall concept. They plan to have so-called voloports in major cities, where the volocopters take off from and where they land. There, they get their battery swapped and are immediately ready for the next takeoff. Volocopter already had successful flight demonstrations and even a quite impressive trial run in Dubai, which looks really amazing with the imposing 828 meter tall Burj Khalifa in the background, the tallest building in the world. We always said that air taxis make a lot of sense in vertical cities such as Dubai, Hong Kong, New York City, Shanghai, Shenzhen, and so on and so forth. Their Volo City is the newest iteration of their air taxi. It has a parachute system and is therefore extremely safe, having 18 redundant rotors, and it actually is surprisingly quiet. A volocopter at a distance of 75 meters would be as loud as a helicopter at 500 meters of distance. Oh, and of course, like the Lilium jet, it is fully electric.
We also mentioned the Bell Nexus, or the Alakai Sky, or the Kitty Hawk Boeing Cora, or the Airbus City Airbus. So to all the people who think that air taxis will never come, you really think that all these companies backed by giant VC funds are just pursuing an unachievable dream? Another new entry to air taxis is the giant Rosa Gyrodyne air taxi concept. It's basically a helicopter-airplane hybrid. They claim that their air taxi will be the safest, because in addition to a parachute deployment system, the main rotor design of the drone Rosa will allow them to safely glide to the ground, even should the systems fail in the zone of 0 to 50 meters, where parachutes wouldn't have enough time to be fully deployed. Plus, they say that the FAA approval for their air taxis will be much easier because it fits an existing category, namely Gyrodyne, which will allow it to be certified under FAA Part 29 rotorcraft requirements. Moreover, the drone Rosa is claimed to be 50 to 60% more silent than a regular helicopter. So it's for sure an interesting addition to the air taxi club. So do you agree with us that Tesla will be the only car maker who will still grow in 2020, despite the crisis?
And which one of all those air taxi concepts do you like the most? So you just watched the JS Disruption Report, which we do on every Wednesday, where we give you our honest opinions on the most recent developments in disruptive technology such as electric cars, air taxis, and many more.
And if you like our show, we would really appreciate if you would also share it with your friends.
So then I would say, on to the future!